A man is in custody in the United States after he breached security and opened fire at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, D.C. Authorities say he's refusing to cooperate with investigators. The event was attended by President Trump, who has always boycotted the gala in the past due to his fractious relationship with much of the press corps. Also at the event were DW's Washington team, Bureau Chief Ines Pohl and correspondent Janelle Dumalaon, were left shaken by their experience, but thankfully unharmed.
Some 2,600 dinner guests were just beginning their starters. Amid the clatter of plates and the mood music, even the president seemed to take a second to realise the danger before he dropped to the ground. Security swarmed in and bundled him and Vice President J.D. Vance away to safety. DW's Washington team were at the dinner. Correspondent Janelle Dumalaon was visiting the bathroom as the order to shelter in place came. She described her experience to Deutsche Welle.
So I had actually gone to the bathroom at this time this incident happened, and as I was washing my hands, I heard what I thought were 6 or 7 very loud gunshots. Apparently this was in the corridor where this bathroom is. And I was actually going to go outside and check, but then 2 women from the security services rushed into the bathroom and said, shots fired, shelter in place. So that is what we ended up doing. We comforted each other because obviously it was a tense time, but I was really holding on to the fact that we hadn't heard any more gunshots. And to me, that could have been a positive sign that the shooter was no longer in any position to inflict more violence. But we didn't have cell reception, so we couldn't really tell what was going on. We didn't have an updated picture of what was happening. But we stayed there until Secret Service came and let us out, and then we were able to get out, reunite with whoever we were supposed to reunite with, our teams, as well as contact others to tell them that we were okay.
The incident has inevitably raised questions about security at the Washington Hilton Hotel where the dinner was held. DW's Washington Bureau Chief Ines Pohl, reporting from the street just after she was evacuated from the hotel herself, said she noticed earlier how easy it was to enter the building.
So there was security, but again, I'm sure that there will be reporting about that. I was really surprised that I didn't have to show any identification and just a printed invitation, which, as I just said, I could have given to pretty much everyone. There is no picture on it. It's just like, a very typical piece of paper.
Donald Trump soon posted CCTV footage that corroborates this. It shows security guards manning a simple desk. A man is seen running past them before they react by drawing their guns. Trump also posted a photo of the purported suspect, apparently after he had been overpowered at the hotel. US media say he's a 31-year-old mechanical engineer from California. US officials did not immediately confirm the man's identity.
But I think you're going to find everything about him. No reason to talk about it now, but tomorrow at this time, long before this time, you're going to know a lot of things about him. They seem to think he was a lone wolf, and I feel that too.
It's the 3rd major security incident or possible assassination attempt survived by President Trump, and the 2nd caught on camera. During a campaign rally in July 2024, a gunman opened fire on Trump from a rooftop, famously grazing his right ear. Investigators have also described the suspect in that case as a lone wolf assailant.
Well, just before the show, I talked to our correspondent Misha Komadovsky in Washington, who was with his colleagues Ines and Janelle inside the hotel when the shooting took place, and he explained to me what he witnessed there.
Everything started pretty much normally. People were gathering around different parts of the Washington Hilton because the networks were hosting their usual pre-parties where colleagues could talk and could raise a glass to the First Amendment before heading to the main area, and then guests made their way gradually downstairs to the main ballroom where the president was seated and where the guests were seated. And yeah, it felt surreal. Donald Trump was immediately covered by Secret Service agents, as we're about to see on the screens here. They basically jumped on top of him to shield him. Cabinet members were also rushed out, and a lot of people in the room appeared to be dropping to the floor because no one really knew what was happening at first. And it wasn't clear that these were gunshots. Some people thought it might have been a protest or something, especially since we had to walk past a whole line of demonstrators on the way into the hotel. And once it became clear something was wrong, people just reacted instinctively, almost like a knee-jerk reaction. Some got under the tables, others kept filming and taking pictures without taking any cover. It was a mix of confusion, a mix of adrenaline, if I may, and for a moment it actually seemed like the dinner might continue, but they eventually decided to cancel and said they would reschedule it within the next 30 days. And Pablo, as for security, it honestly felt pretty standard for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, same as the past a few years. I've been to 4 of those in a row, and I have to say it was pretty normal. To get into the hotel, all you needed was a perforated piece of paper, a ticket. It wasn't even in your name, just a perforated slip of paper with the event name and your table number. That alone could get you past the outer police cordon, which stands out since the hotel is still operating as usual. It's a functioning business with people checking in and checking out. And then to get into the ballroom downstairs, you show the same ticket again, but without any ID check. And only then you went through the usual security screening, like TSA like screening with the metal detectors and Secret Service agents.
All right, that sounds, I mean, I'm sure that's certainly raising a lot of questions with regards to security. And of course, we can't forget that a Secret Service agent was hit. What do we know about that person?
We don't know their identity, but what we do know is that the agent sustained non-life-threatening injuries thanks to protective gear. They were hit in a torso or chest at close range during an exchange of gunfire near the main checkpoint, the main screening area outside the ballroom where President Trump was attending. And he confirmed that the agent was wearing a bulletproof vest, and that stopped the round.
What can you tell us about the suspect?
Well, the suspect has been identified as a 31-year-old man. There's also security footage shared by President Donald Trump that shows a man suddenly sprinting through that screening area and past Secret Service officers. You can see law enforcement immediately react, turning toward him with guns before rushing in and taking him down off camera. That's exactly the footage I'm talking about. Extraordinary scene in the very heart of Washington, D.C., at the hotel where the cabinet members and the president himself were gathered to celebrate the First Amendment.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying stuff, to say the least. Now, Misha, Donald Trump spoke to the media shortly after the shooting. So let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Nobody told me this was such a dangerous profession. If Marco would have told me, maybe I wouldn't have run. Maybe I would have said, I'll take a pass. No, it's a dangerous profession, but I don't view it that way. Look, I'm here to do a job. As part of the job, it is a dangerous, I can't imagine that there's any profession that's more dangerous.
All right, well, there was Donald Trump finding even the time to crack a joke even there in between everything. What more did Donald Trump have to say, Misha?
Well, take a look at the scene here. Again, we saw journalists wearing tuxedos and gowns instead of our work clothes. just because people were rushed from the hotels directly to the White House, to the press briefing room where President Trump was going to give that press conference. And he described the White House Correspondents' Dinner as an event for freedom of speech that unexpectedly unified Republicans, he unified Democrats, and the press in a beautiful way, as he said, amid the crisis. President Trump expressed his desire to continue the dinner within the next 30 days or something, but deferred to law enforcement, and he announced plans to reschedule it soon, refusing to let violence, as he said, take over the American society. Quite different language about the White House Correspondents' Dinner if you compare it to what he had said in the past. Mind you that President Trump, it was President Trump's first dinner that he attended as the United States president. So now he was calling for unity.
It sounds like it. So, of course, this shooting is just days, essentially, from the state visit of King Charles and Queen Camilla to the United States. So is this shooting going to affect that trip? What's known about the security and the concerns that, of course, this has raised with regards to, this state visit?
Well, indeed, it will affect the schedule, and this shooting has really put security front and center here in Washington, D.C. So if you put the shooting if you put this visit against that backdrop, the upcoming visit by the royal couple is taking an added significance. It's going to be a 4-day trip, as we know, hosted by President Trump, by First Lady Melania Trump. It kicks off Monday and will include events in the White House. It will include events like all over D.C., now with even tighter coordination between the United States and the United Kingdom security teams in light of what had just happened last night.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Misha. Great to get that update from you, and I hope you have a relaxing Sunday. DW's Misha Komadovsky in Washington, D.C. All right, let's speak now to Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director of the Counterterrorism Project. Hans-Jakob is joining us from here in Berlin. Right, welcome to DW News. So there have been several security incidents involving Donald Trump over the past few years, one of which, of course, resulted in him being shot in the ear back in 2024. What's your take on how effective his security is?
Look, while very clearly during the election campaign in the event in Pennsylvania, there was a catastrophic failure of his security system that was set up in place, including security agencies not being able to electronically communicate with each other during that event. Here, of course, questions need to be asked. How can get a guy a shotgun inside the hotel in which the President of the United States is going to be and speak? The security system actually worked. It did what it was designed to do. It had several layers of security. In the final one, when it came to the actual weapons check, held out, and they were able to prevent the individual from getting into the ballroom. So there is, of course, some discussion to be had on how this could go, that he was already inside the building with a weapon, but it did work. No one except for this one agent was hurt.
Right, now the acting US Attorney General Todd Blanche says the suspect for this shooting is still under investigation, but that he was likely targeting officials, including the president. What's the state of political violence in the US?
Over the last couple of years, unfortunately, there's been an uptick of political violence on really both sides, from the right-wing extremists, where there was always a propensity towards violence. We've unfortunately, both in North America, but also here in Europe, seen an uptick of violence against other human beings from left-wing extremists. While in the past, left-wing extremist violence was more concentrated on infrastructure, cars, things, there has been a tendency towards violence towards individuals, including political violence towards individuals, in particular in the last 2.5 years since October 7th.
All right, but is it only from left-wing extremists, or are there kind of more groups involved?
No, no, no. No, I mean, as I said, there has been always a constant level of political violence also from the extreme right. There's some very high-ranking state officials that died last year that were killed in their house. So that's has always happened. What happens is that there is an additional amount of violence. And then, of course, there has been violence from kind of conspiratorial individuals who have very individualized conspiratorial theories on why the world works the way it works.
Now, gun violence is common in the United States when you compare it to, say, other countries, say here in Europe, for example. But what can actually be done to prevent shootings of this kind that we've just seen in Washington, D.C. from taking place? Now, you talked us through, say, how the security process functioned in this event in Washington. But can it be tighter, or what? How do security specialists or experts deal with these kind of events?
Well, I mean, the real sad story here is that gun control is very checkered inside the United States. While, of course, there's stricter gun control laws in Washington, D.C., just over the river, over the Potomac in Virginia, it's very loosely controlled. So as long as you don't have a equal gun control system nationwide in a country as well connected as the United States, it really doesn't matter within your individual state you have tighter gun control laws or not, because people simply can cross a bridge or cross a state line and then they have a firearm. There is still a question of how this gun got into the hotel, as I said. Other than that, monitoring online is potentially the only way you can do that, but that requires the cooperation of the platforms, which are not legally mandated neither in the United States nor in Europe to proactively give a tip to law enforcement if someone actually radicalized towards violence or seems to be planning something. So we are in a pretty difficult situation. The lone actor, lone perpetrator or individual perpetrator phenomenon is just about the hardest one to counter for security agencies, because there is no network involved. There is no preparation involved. Now, with the gun control laws in America, the way they are, even procuring a gun is not something that triggers any particular red alerts. So it's really tough. You have to rely on the security in the end at the place where the event is happening. That's easier when it's the American president. It's much harder when it's a Christmas market in Germany, of course.
Yeah, of course. Now, we've only got about 40 seconds left, but how do you see the Trump administration dealing with this incident? And is there actually enough trust in the process, or at least the political process and in the US?
Look, I mean, I don't think it's a great revelation that there are problems within the Trump administration's handling of security issues. There's been a very much concentration on immigration, illegal immigration checks, where a lot of the resources went in, while other crime areas were not quite as well resourced, and there's a lot of reshuffling of personnel. Now, the way that the president reacted last night was very different how he reacted in the past. So not immediately attacking his political opponents. Maybe there is a learning curve.
All right, great to get your analysis there, Hans-Jakob. Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director of the Counterterrorism Project. Thanks so much.
I'm now joined by Bruce Hoffman. He's a Senior Fellow for Counterterrorism and Homeland Security at the Council on Foreign Relations and is also the author of God, Guns, and Sedition, Far-Right Terrorism in America. Bruce, thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
So after so many attacks in recent years, are you surprised the gunman was able to get so close to the U.S. president?
Yes, I am. Although at the same time, the hotel was a public venue. The gunman had apparently rented a room there, so as a guest had easy access, not just to his room, obviously, but even to the space in front of where the correspondence dinner was being held. So this will certainly prompt, I think, a very thorough review of security at all presidential and indeed cabinet member events going forward.
Now, as we just heard in the report there, this is the third serious attempt on the U.S. president's life. Is it fair to say that political violence is becoming a more common feature of American life?
It's not just fair, it's accurate to say that. For example, last year, threats to members of Congress more than doubled compared to the figure in 2017. So on an annual basis, there were some 10,000 threats against members of Congress that were taken seriously by the U.S. Capitol Police. This would be the 13th, what I would regard as a major assassination attempt or kidnap attempt against a major American political figure since 2017. It affects members of both parties, not just one. But of course, President Trump in particular, who has been a controversial president, it's almost unprecedented, at least that I can think of, that a sitting president will now have accumulated 3 separate serious assassination attempts.
So what exactly is behind this wave of violence? Is it a guns issue, political rhetoric, or a mental health crisis, as often is claimed?
I think it's all 3 of those things. Look, just last year, there was a poll of persons who identify themselves as Democrats, and some 40% stated or agreed with the statement that it would be justifiable to use force to remove President Trump from office. I mean, that's astonishing that nearly half of self-identified Democrats say that in a democracy. But you know, when President Biden was president, when Republicans or self-identified Republicans were asked the same question, it was nearly an identical percentage of nearly 40% of Republicans said it was justified to use force to remove President Biden from office. So we see a country that is very divided, that's very fractured, that has ready access to firearms, and as you noted also, where many people have mental health issues that not just motivate them or inspire them, but actually animate them to go out and commit these acts of violence against elected public officials.
Now, you just said that we're seeing numbers indicating people are willing to use political violence or see it as justified, both on the left and the right. Are there any other unifying factors between people who are ready to carry out these violent acts like the ones we saw yesterday?
At this moment, no, because when you go back just the past 8 or 9 years, you see a very serious attempt against Republicans at a baseball practice in 2017 that nearly resulted in the death of the then and now majority leader Steve Scalise from Louisiana. You saw an incident just a few years ago in California where a man armed with a hammer attempted to murder then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat. Her husband was home instead, and he was very seriously injured. You've seen kidnap plots against the Democratic governor of Michigan, for example, before the 2020 election. And of course, the assassination just this past September of Charlie Kirk, who was a leading voice in the conservative and Republican parties.
Now, during the last several election cycles, we've seen some people call for both sides to tame the rhetoric down, to kind of lower the volume. But beyond that, are you seeing any real political attempts to quell violence like this in the United States?
No, I think there's rhetoric in the aftermath of these tragedies or near tragedies that attempt to diffuse the fervor that one sees in support of political violence. But I think unity in the United States has remained elusive. And at a time when the United States is involved with a highly contentious war with Iran, when the cost of living is going up, now even accelerated by the cost of gasoline, there's lots of even additional factors that are making people even more unnerved, perhaps more angry, perhaps more frustrated. And given those 3 elements you talked about, political divisiveness, access to guns, and mental health, that becomes a very powerful witch's brew that I think suggests last night's incident won't be the last, unfortunately and tragically, that we'll be witnessing or hearing about.
Well, you know, I'm 42 years old, and I hate to put it like this, but when I was a kid, school shootings in the U.S. were a rarity until the Columbine massacre in '99, and since then they've become commonplace. After so many attacks in recent years, is this just something Americans are going to have to get used to?
Well, I think tragically and unfortunately, Americans have already gotten used to it. And I think most frustratingly for many Americans is that none of our political leaders, apart from rhetoric, are offering tangible, meaningful solutions. I would say, in addition to the 3 causes or factors that you identified, I would add the growth and the pervasiveness of social media is yet another one. When there are algorithms that actually fuel this type of divisiveness, anger, hatred, because it's responding to a quest on the part of users to see more information of this kind that doesn't diffuse the situation, but only exacerbates and heightens it.
Some very sobering thoughts there. That was Bruce Hoffman, Senior Fellow for Counterterrorism and Homeland Security at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for your insights.
You're very welcome.